ओम परतत्वे सदा लीनो रामकृष्णसमाज्ञया यो धर्मस्थापनरतो वीरेशं तं नमाम्यहम्. Today we are starting a new series in a way. In a way we had started it when we started the series on practical Vedanta. And there I had explained that practical Vedanta is a part of Jnana Yoga and why it is to be taken first, to orient our mind towards realization of the lessons which we learn in Jnana Yoga. Otherwise, Jnana Yoga may end in some intellectual pleasure. It's a great joy to intellectually understand Vedanta, but that is not the goal of life. The goal of life is realization of our own real nature. So in a way, from the book point of view, today we are starting a new series. And the name of the book is Jnana Yoga, and the author is Swami Vivekananda. So we have to first of all think what is Jnana Yoga, and we know that this word is a samasik word in Sanskrit, a joint word. It has two parts, Jnana and Yoga. And Yoga is the main thing here. Jnana is the qualification used for that Yoga. Because we know, we are aware that Swami Vivekananda himself has lectured and written from that 4 books, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga. And in Karma Yoga, last chapter we saw that Swami Vivekananda said, yogas are many in number. I have generalized them into 4. That is what Swamiji had said. So, and the example is that the colophon, the ending of the 18 chapters of the Gita are all yogas. Arjuna Vishada Yoga, Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, etc., etc. So, 18 yogas have been enumerated in the Gita itself. And there Swamiji has said one more thing which is very important in that Karma Yoga lecture, that no yoga is independent of the other yogas. Please mark this. Some people say, Swamiji has said 4 yogas can independently lead to. Yes, Swamiji has made that statement, but that statement has to be qualified by another generalized statement of Swamiji that no yoga is independent of each other. They all blend into each other. And they converge into the realization of mukti is another thing. But in their own nature, they blend into each other. And we give that name which we find preponderating there. That's all. If we find in the process that the process of jnana is preponderating over others, we call it the name Jnana Yoga. But it's not independent of bhakti. It's not independent of Raja Yoga. It's not independent of Karma Yoga. So no yoga is independent is Swamiji's basic statement. At the end of Karma Yoga you will find it. So with that in mind, we now turn to this particular branch of yoga, or this specified yoga where jnanam seems to predominate. So yoga is the main word. And yoga, the meaning of yoga, we should not jump upon pranayam, pratyahara and yoga. Yoga is the meaning, according to Shankar Bhashya in the Gita, tat prapti upaya, a method devised by the rishis for human beings to realize that truth. A particular systematic method devised by the rishis for human beings to reach that same goal. And why so many methods have been devised? Because the minds of men are different. Swamiji has 2 lectures on the universal religion that also will come at the end of this book. And there we see that people have different constitutions. So, jnana is the qualificatory word. So, two things you have to learn. What is this jnana and how it becomes jnana yoga? And what is the constitution of the man who follows this? That is the most important thing. Now we find amongst men, broadly classified by Swamiji, let us take the Western view of human mind. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, mind is the seat of consciousness, thinking, feeling and will. Mind is the seat of consciousness, thinking, feeling and will. Now it is the seat of consciousness in a different way than the Webster thinks. That the consciousness belongs to my reality. Consciousness is one without a second. Consciousness is Brahman. But my mind receives it. So mind is the seat where the consciousness is received. And then it becomes my consciousness. It becomes my consciousness when the consciousness is received by my mind. In this way, mind is the seat of consciousness. Now, mind has several functions, and Aitari Upanishad and Brihadaranyaka enumerate more than 10 functions of the mind. But let us go by the Western analysis again. Thinking, feeling and will. These are the faculties of the mind. Mind works in these three ways. Thinking, feeling, will. Mind has many more faculties. Mind has imagination, mind has self-control, mind has self-observation. So, but broadly speaking, mind functions in these three ways. Now, let me take up the will function first. Will function is of two types. I shall do is will. I shall not do also is will. And we can call that will as self-control. Now, depending upon, now all our thinking, feeling and will have been vitiated because life after life, for do not know how many times, we have been born with wrong knowledge. And that wrong knowledge has resulted in our wrong thinking, wrong feeling, wrong will. Now, two things are there. One is that if the wrong will is corrected to become a right will, plus if the will is preponderant in a man, that will is used for going to Brahman. First thing, will is corrected from right to wrong, wrong to right, and will is used for realizing Brahman. Then we call it Karma Yoga, preponderantly. Without bhakti, there cannot be any karma yoga. Without jnana, there cannot be any karma yoga. But preponderantly, we see the activity in man and we say he is a karma yogi. Now, this very will, the negative side of the will, I shall not do, or self-control. This control, not doing certain things, also has to be used properly. Otherwise, Chakka Bandha, Bharat Bandha, that are the destructive forms of will. But I shall not allow any lower functions in my personality to build up my higher personality. That type of self-control, both sides. The will is to be corrected and the will is to be used, negative will, to realize God. Then it becomes Raja Yoga. So will is negative will and positive will. The positive will correction, positive will preponderantly used to realize God is Karma Yoga. Negative will to be corrected, negative will is to be used for realizing God, that is called Raja Yoga. Now feeling is a great faculty in man, and that has gone wrong. Our feeling is I love so and so and I hate so and so. This feeling is totally wrong. So feeling has to be corrected. And there are people with predominance of feeling in them. And so that has to be used for realizing God. That becomes Bhakti Yoga. Now what is this constitution? Thinking. We see certain people think and think and think and think. That will become the prominent faculty in them. Not that they are bereft of feeling, not that they are bereft of activity, but thinking seems to be predominant in them. Now this thinking is generally analytical. And we use this thinking, say, in science or in the Western thought. Why this thinking is used? How? We take for granted, we assume without testing that the world consists of objects. And we analyze those objects. This is science or the Western way of thinking. But Indian thought is completely different from this. Whether there is a subject, whether there is an object, we do not know. But our experience is subject experiencing object through some sense organ. I see something, I hear something, I touch something. Now this experience of ours is to be analyzed. Not particular objects, but our experience of the world, we are actually unaware that there is an outside world. Because we experience the world, that much we know. We are sure of our experiencing the world. And if the analytical faculty is used to analyze this experience and to find out that it is wrong and to correct it, taking it towards the right experience, that is one faculty of thinking. And thinking is predominantly used to realize the reality. Thinking or analysis has to be corrected, its very field has to be corrected, its very mode has to be corrected, and the corrected thinking is to be used for experiencing God. Then it becomes Jnana Yoga. So, that is the Jnana Yoga. I have not yet described what is Jnana. I have described the constitution of a man in whom thinking is predominant, and for him this course is prescribed Jnana Yoga. For others, Jnana Yoga becomes useful because it is a contributory factor in Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga. But basically, it is designed for the person whose thinking capacity is prominent. Now let us analyze our Jnana. Jnana is not information, Jnana is not conviction, Jnana is the actual experience we have. And what is our actual experience? To take a name from the field of philosophy, Russian philosopher Ouspensky has said, all our experiences can be reduced to an irreducible minimum, and that irreducible minimum is a subject experiencing object. That is our today's experience. We always take, now let us take the example of the dream here. In dream, suppose I am eating a mango. Now I get up and I understand that that mango was made by my mind. There was no mango there. But side by side, that I who was eating the mango also was made by my mind, because I was sleeping on the cot. But the relation with that I, who was made by my mind as eating the mango, I get a subjective connection that it is I. Though the form may be different, though the form may be completely different, but somehow my mind attaches to that as the subject. And the mango which I was eating, which was also made by my mind attaches itself as an object. That is the nature of the mind. Mind makes everything bipolarized. And one pole is called as I, the other pole as object. That is what our mind has created. Whether the world of objects exists or not, we are not sure. We are sure of our experiencing the world of objects. And there we take ourselves as the subject. We take ourselves as the subject and the world as the object. That is what our mind has created. Now, this is analysis of our experience. And this is wrong. This is called Jnanam. Jnanam is the irreducible minimum. It is not thinking, it is not feeling. All our thinking, all our feeling, all our will proceeds from this basic conception that I am the subject, I am dealing with the object. This is involved in all our thinking. It is involved in all our feeling. It is involved in all our will, positive or negative. But the faculty of analysis being present, we want to correct it. How it is wrong? We do not need Shankaracharya to prove that it is wrong. We do not need Sri Ramakrishna to prove it is wrong. We do not require Vivekananda to prove it is wrong. It is self-evidently wrong. If I am the body, which is ever-changing, which is I, that I which has existed yesterday or that I which exists today? A small baby and an old man. That baby will become that old man, we say. But the I is completely different. The body is changing every moment. And I am the mind. Mind is changing every moment, waxing and waning. I just now told you the I consciousness also is changing. The I consciousness of a small baby and I consciousness of an old man are totally different. And yet, that is called ignorance or wrong knowledge. And yet, we do not think our knowledge, our today's knowledge is that I am something fixed. I am something fixed is our today's conception or knowledge which is involved in all our thinking, feeling and will. But it is wrong because the changing thing has no meaning. What is the thing which changes? Yesterday's or today's? We say that this building is such that 200 years nothing will happen. If that be true, eternally nothing would happen to it. Because nothing would happen means after 200 years, it will be same as it was made today. So count from there 200 years. The building has started changing the moment it was made. A pillar of the building started decomposing the moment the other pillar was being made. Nothing will happen only means you will not see a crack outside. So, these are ever-changing things. And to call it myself is a misnomer. Another thing, this I is shifting. I am the body, my body. My body is not I body. I am the mind. I am the I consciousness. I am pranas, I am indriyas. This I is shifting continuously. It is this I. So from these two counts we say that the very concept that I am somebody is wrong. A fixed individual. We saw this in practical Vedanta also. Swamiji said on universal we can think of some I. In individual we cannot think of some I at all. Now, we take Vedanta. That is, what is the Rishi's consciousness? What is Thakur's exact consciousness? That there is only one consciousness. In this body mind it says I so and so. In that body it says I so and so. In that body it says I am a girl. In that body it says I am a boy. In that body it says I am an old man. So on this we can understand that our I is wrong. Two counts without Vedanta. Changing, shifting. Third count with the help of Vedanta. From the Rishi's experience, from the Avatara's experience, why their experience is right? Because that has given them absolute, peaceful, blessed life. And our knowledge of ourselves has given us wretched, miserable life, competitive life. And so, our I is wrong. Now, but that is our consciousness today. So how this I consciousness can be changed into Rishi's consciousness? That is real, ours is unreal. So it can be changed. It can be changed. And as practical Vedanta told us, it can be changed by Shravan Manan Nididhyasana. That is the basic sadhana. Now, take any yoga, take Bhakti Yoga. We love God. And by that love, the difference between I and God vanishes. Then only it is love. So what happens? The consciousness is changed. So all yogas are basically Jnana yogas. People think Shankar has emphasized Jnana yoga. It is an emphasis, nothing more. His constitution was that of analytical mind. But I was telling the other day that he has devised Bhakti Yoga and everything by his sutras and so many things. Anyway, so all yogas are ultimately Jnana yogas. Whether it is Bhakti, whether it is Karma, whether it is Raj Yoga, ultimately, unless the consciousness is changed, there is no freedom. Let us find the anatomy of Mukti. When the consciousness is that there is only one reality in the world, when the consciousness is that there is only one consciousness in the world, then that is Mukti, because it is not bound by anything. It is not bound by I am being the body or the mind. It is not bound by my subject and object consciousness. So the very anatomy of Mukti is that there is only one consciousness. How it will come? By changing my consciousness. And that is why Shankar said that Jnana Yoga. But changing my consciousness can happen in so many ways. Through love, real love. Through real love, the difference between myself and God as an object vanishes. And I do not find any difference. So, we call it Bhakti Yoga. Change of consciousness through love is called Bhakti Yoga. Change of consciousness by unselfish work, by work dedicated to God, consciousness is changed. And so that is Karma Yoga. By change of consciousness, by not allowing the subject-object to vibrate, is Raj Yoga. So there also change of consciousness through control. So that is called Raj Yoga. So now, two things are combining, Jnana and Yoga. Jnana is the basic consciousness which we have, which is found to be wrong, and it has to be changed into the consciousness which rishis have. And in the way, we have to correct our analytical thinking, and we have to use our analytical thinking for changing our consciousness. This is the complete definition of Jnana Yoga, please. Jnana Yoga is meant for those who are predominantly have the analytical faculty in them. It is useful for all others also, and it ends in the changed consciousness through our analytical faculty. First we have to correct the analytical faculty, and then we have to use it for changing our consciousness. I think I have sufficiently explicitly defined Jnana Yoga. Otherwise, we don't know what we are reading, and we just a name is there, Jnana Yoga. So this name has these two elements. The jnana which you have has to be changed. Analytical faculty we have, thinking, that has to be changed and that has to be applied for the change of consciousness. This is called Jnana Yoga. Now, second part. Second part means we are studying Jnana Yoga by Swami Vivekananda. Why? Because Swami Vivekananda's consciousness was changed. And it was changed through analytical thinking. So he is past master in Jnana Yoga. And so he can guide us. Any scholar cannot guide us. Only the Rishi can guide us. And one more point is there in Swami Vivekananda compared to others. And that is, he has seen Shri Ramakrishna before him. He has seen the life of Shri Ramakrishna. And Swami Vivekananda had said, he lived the life, he left me to explain it. And in many places, it becomes so clear that he has Shri Ramakrishna inside himself. He is looking at Shri Ramakrishna and lecturing. That is what we come to feel while reading Swamiji's all the lectures. Maybe one or two exceptions, when he is speaking of women of India, he is looking at Holy Mother. Otherwise, he has seen. And what Swamiji said, I have seen Upanishads before my eyes. I have seen Upanishads eating, talking, moving. So, another type, what is this Jnana Yoga? Swamiji's lectures on various Upanishads that we had seen during the practical Vedanta also. Upanishads are the mine of knowledge, not information. Upanishads are the mine of knowledge, not reason. Upanishads are the mine of knowledge which change our consciousness into the real consciousness. And Swamiji's lectures on that, Swamiji's simple explanation of that is Swamiji's Jnana Yoga. And so, Swamiji has a dual role. Swamiji is the Rishi and Swamiji is the commentator. Swamiji, through his buddhi, his analytical faculty, he catches what is this knowledge and he transmits to us. That is the function of the Muni. And Swamiji is basically a Rishi also, but the main Rishi is Shri Ramakrishna here. Shri Ramakrishna is all out Rishi. And Swami Vivekananda is both Rishi Muni. He has collected from Shri Ramakrishna all the answers which his mind was questioning. And he has given us those things. And we are blessed to be born in Ramakrishna Vivekananda age. And so, we take up Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga. Now the times have changed even from Swami Vivekananda. And so certain words you have to understand. Words have changed their meaning. It happens by the passage of time. See the first lecture. In the book Jnana Yoga, in the beginning, the song of Sannyasin is given, but we shall take it up at the end. That is only the statement of a man of realization. So that we will take it at the end. And we begin with the first lecture, The Necessity of Religion, delivered in London. The date is not given here. Please mark out. Mary Louise Burke, who wrote 6 volumes, Swami Vivekananda in the West, New Discoveries, has found out the dates of every lecture. And the lecture, now it is available in a chart. This is 7th June 1896. During that talks on practical Vedanta, I already told you that the London lectures are taken first, though chronologically they are later. And to that are added New York lectures which were earlier. That is Swamiji's Jnana Yoga. So, the first lecture, the necessity of religion. Unless we feel the need, unless we hanker after it, we will not change into realization. Now the heading is necessity of religion, and here I said the language has changed. These days lot of talk goes on, the religions divide a man, spirituality we want. But that was not during Swamiji's time. In Swamiji's books everywhere, he has identified these two, religion and spirituality. In one of his books, everywhere, but I remember a passage from the Inspired Talks. He has defined it in his own way. If a person has, his joy is more inside, he is more religious, he is more spiritual, like that Swamiji is telling. So these two are equated in Swamiji's mind. What is religion? In Swamiji's definition, realization. What is spirituality? Realization. So, this form of religion we should not take into consideration. And religion does not divide. Religion takes a man to God. How can it divide? So, due to passage of time, the words have changed their meaning. This you should remember. Even from Swamiji's time to today, though Swamiji is the most modern interpreter, but from Swamiji's time to today, some words have changed their meaning. So when Swamiji says necessity of religion, he means necessity of spirituality. This you must remember. The necessity of experiencing our real nature, that is religion. And why it is necessary in our life. Otherwise we are living an animal's life. In Swamiji's language, we are living a vegetating, ignorant life, unless we know our real nature. So, what is the need of it? Swamiji is explaining. See now, first sentence. Of all the forces that have worked and are still working to mold the destinies of the human race, none certainly is more potent than that, the manifestation of which we call religion. So many ideas are packed into this one sentence. First of all, we see it is a force. It is a force which changes the destiny of human race. It changes the destiny of every individual human being. And there may be some other forces working to change that. Sometimes the economic considerations, sometimes some scientific considerations, political considerations may change the course of man's life, but they are not as forceful as the force of religion. But Swamiji does not say the force of religion, there is another beauty here. So this is a force that have worked and are still working to mold the destinies of the human race. None certainly is more potent than that, the manifestation of which we call religion. So Swamiji's religion is spirituality, but we means general mankind. So, see the language? Manifestation of that we call religion. So religion is a manifestation. The manifestation of what? We will find from Swamiji himself. Why go elsewhere? Swamiji is using these words. So remember, take down those who do not know. Swamiji says, religion, because we have to find a manifestation. Only one sentence. Religion is the manifestation of divinity already in man. Religion is the manifestation of divinity already in man. So manifestation of what? manifestation of divinity already in man. And this divinity already in man is the force which changes the course of man's mind. Understood the first sentence? That force is more powerful, of which the manifestation we call religion. And that religion is the manifestation of divinity which is already in man. So this divinity already in man is a force. And divinity already in man is a force, it changes the course of man's life. Why? How? Divinity is a self-manifesting thing. It forces a man to manifest this divinity. And that changes his thinking, feeling, will, everything. Though we are more concerned with the analytical faculty, but it changes the personality of man, not only analytical faculty. We understand the first sentence? So Swamiji's Rishi Vakyas, we have to take it very, very slowly and seriously. It is not like a novel reading. Necessity of religion. Swamiji's mind says religion is spirituality. So necessity of religion is necessity of spirituality. In the first sentence, Swamiji has used manifestation of what we call religion. Here we is not Swamiji, we is humanity, plural. And the humanity thinks of religion as, Swamiji himself has told it, manifestation of the divinity already in man. That is the force. And it changes. Mold the destinies of human race. Now human race is a collective word, means it changes the destiny of every human being. Next sentence. All social organizations have as a background somewhere the workings of that peculiar force. And the greatest cohesive impulse ever brought into play amongst human units has been derived from this power. So next he comes to society. And it takes to social organization. Social organizations means the order of the Samaj. Indian society has a particular method. Western society has a particular method. Arabian society has a particular method. That is called social organization. Now, somewhere as a background, the workings of the peculiar force. Because we do not see it outside. So it is the background. And immediately if we look behind, we will not see it. So somewhere in the background. Somewhere in the background means deeper and deeper in the background of the formation of society is the working of that peculiar force. What is the peculiar force? Manifestation of divinity in man. Now, outside what we can see? Religion is the manifestation outside. So what do we see about the working of that force? Greatest cohesive impulse. Cohesive means a man and a group. They become cohesively connected by progeny. Common father, brothers are connected. Race, Indians, Chinese, they are ethnically, we say, connected. But the outside manifestation is religion. That religion connects man to man much more. Greatest cohesive impulse, that means other cohesive impulses are there. The greatest cohesive impulse ever brought into play amongst human units, take human individuals as units, has been derived from this power. Power is to express the divinity, but it has taken the form of religion, and that religion has become the cohesive force. We have even forgotten the original power. You know the example Swamiji is giving? It is obvious to all of us that in very many cases the bonds of religion have proved stronger than the bonds of race or climate or even of descent. Just now I described all that. Race, India, Russia, etc., etc. And many people say that the climate changes the mind. So the Indian climate, European climate and all that has changed the mind. Or descent. Descent means gotra. I am born of these parents. They were born of these parents. There was a common parent. So from that parent, we are the Vavishadas, we are the descendants, and that gives us a bond. All Mukherjees, all Pandits, all Patels, they give a bond. But compared to them, the religion, the manifestation called religion, is a much more cohesive bond. Swamiji is explaining that it is a well-known fact that persons worshipping the same God, believing in the same religion, have stood by each other with much greater strength and constancy than people of merely the same descent or even brothers. Brothers is the closest unit of that descent, same father and brothers. But suppose out of the two brothers, one is a Muslim, one is a Sikh, one is a Hindu, then they will not stand together. The Muslim will stand with his Muslim brothers. The Hindu will stand with his Hindu brothers. The Sikh will stand with his Sikh brothers. So that is more cohesive force than being born of the same father. Now, though the paragraphs are given, but the ideas, a new idea starts from here. This is one statement which Swamiji has made. Cohesive force, human destiny, and the force is religion. Now, where from has it started? How this has come? So, here we should mark a new para beginning, though it is not given in the book. Various attempts have been made to trace the beginnings of religion. From where this has come, from where the search for spirituality has come, from where the search for God has come, how it came to human mind. So to know a thing, we should know its source, we should know its nature, and we should know its result. Result, Swamiji has told cohesion and power to mold the destiny. Nature, he will explain later on, but we take for granted him is the spiritual evolution, manifestation of divinity. Now the origin we have to think of. In all the ancient religions which have come down to us at the present day, you understood this. Some ancient religions are lost. Swamiji is not talking of them. Some are born very new. Swamiji is not talking of them. Ancient religions which have come to the present day. So the tenacity, the cohesiveness, the continuity is there. Those religions Swamiji is taking for consideration. They will reveal the true nature. In all the ancient religions which have come down to us at the present day, we find one claim made that they are all supernatural. Here comes religion and spirituality and all that. Supernatural is the source of that religion. That their genesis is not as it were in the human brain. They have not been thought out by man. Thinking of man has not brought religion, but that they have originated somewhere outside of it. What is outside? Transcendent, beyond, higher. So all religions the origins at least are supersensuous truths. The form of the religion we see different. But the origin of every religion is, now the form has deteriorated or all that has happened. But the origin of every religion, there we can understand the nature of that religion is that it is transcendent, supersensuous. That is the thing. Now what is that supersensuous? How it has come? That Swamiji has to trace for us. Then only we will understand our real nature. Two theories have gained some acceptance amongst modern scholars. Now remember one more thing about Swamiji. Swamiji is not talking of a particular religion. Swamiji's mind is a universal mind. And he has studied all the religions and their origins, and then he is talking. So it is applicable to man in India, America, Russia, Arabian countries, England, anywhere. Because Swamiji has taken into consideration all the religions. And so he says that two theories have gained some acceptance amongst modern scholars. One is the spirit theory of religion. Spirit means Atman. Spirit means bodiless existence. That is the meaning of the spirit. And from that we find spirituality. And the wrong use of that becomes spiritualism, running after ghosts and planchets. But the basic is that spirit is disembodied reality. Spirit means the reality in man. So, one is this theory. The other, the evolution of the idea of the infinite. We see the world, and we see the world to be infinite. And we search what is the reality behind that infinite. So one, you may say in our language, one is the search for Atman, the other is the search for Brahman. These are the two theories which have been accepted by scholars about all the religions of the world. One party maintains that ancestor worship is the beginning of religion, religious ideas. Why ancestors? Because even if they die, the spirit remains. And so the worship of ancestors is there. Worship of ancestors means worship of the spirit which remains even after a man is dead. The other, that religion originates in the personification of the powers of nature. Nature is infinite and there are powers of nature, but that powers are given personalities. What is the meaning of a personality? A consciousness and a name. Consciousness and a name given to the powers of nature. We see fire, but we make it fire God. And we know it is consciousness living within that phenomena called fire. Similarly, water, air, wind, everything, trees, forests, houses, they have the personification, means a consciousness living in them and a name given to them. Man wants to keep up he too is continuously, simultaneously telling, man wants to keep up the memory of his dead relatives and think they are living even when the body is dissolved. And he wants to place food for them and in a certain sense to worship them. Out of that came the growth we call religion. That is the one idea. The other idea? Now first he explained the first idea now. After describing both together, now he explained the first idea. Studying the ancient religions of the Egyptians, Babylonians, Chinese and many other races in America and elsewhere, we find very clear traces of this ancestor worship being the beginning of religion. With the ancient Egyptians, the first idea of the soul was that of a double. So the ideas are crude, but the ideas evolve. And the idea is of a spirit, and it is a double. What is the meaning of the double? Every human body contained in it another being very similar to it. And when a man died, this double went out of the body and yet lived on. That is double. Something in the body like the body, but different from the body. Body dies, this does not die. But the life of the double lasted only so long as the dead body remained intact. That is the crudest idea. Though it is different from the body is important and it depends upon the body. Though the body is dead. And that is why we find among the Egyptians so much solicitude to keep the body uninjured even after death. Hindus will burn the body immediately. And that is why they built those huge pyramids in which they preserved the bodies. For if any portion of the external body was hurt, the double would be correspondingly injured. That is their idea of the double. Very crude idea. This is clearly ancestor worship. With the ancient Babylonians, we find the same idea of the double, but with a variation. So evolution, or some is comparing the different ideas. The double lost all sense of love. It frightened the living to give it food and drink and to help it in various ways. So the double does not behave sweetly with its relatives, old relatives. It lost the love and it frightened the living beings to give it food and drink and to help it in various ways. Give me this or give me that. It even lost all affection for its own children and its own wife. That is the Babylonian idea. Among the ancient Hindus also, we find traces of this ancestor worship. Traces, not very big. Comparatively more among the southern Indians. I am not going to elaborate on it. Among the Chinese, the basis of the religion may also be said to be ancestor worship, and it still permeates the length and breadth of that vast country. Still means in Swamiji's time. Now the communists have come and suppressed all religious expression themselves. In fact, the only religion that can really be said to flourish in China is that of ancestor worship. Thus it seems, on the one hand, a very good position is made out for those who hold the theory of ancestor worship as the beginning of religion. On the other hand, there are scholars who from the ancient Aryan literature, Aryan is a particular name, not Hindus. Aryans live throughout Europe. Aryans live in India. So, Aryan is a particular race. There are scholars who from the ancient Aryan literature show that religion originated in nature worship. It starts from the Vedas. Although in India we find proofs of ancestor worship everywhere, yet in the oldest record there is no trace of it whatsoever. That is a later addition. But the oldest records, in the Rig Veda, Samhita, the most ancient record of the Aryan race, we do not find any trace of it, ancestor worship. Modern scholars think it is the worship of nature that they find there. Yes, please. यही ले रख दो यही. The human mind seems to struggle to get a peep behind the sense. struggling to see beyond the scene. So, outside, transcendent, the dawn, the evening, the hurricane, these stupendous and gigantic forces of nature, its beauties, these have exercised the human mind and it aspires to go beyond, to understand something about them. In the struggle, they endow these phenomena with personal attributes, giving them souls and bodies, sometimes beautiful, sometimes transcendent. Sometimes beautiful, not sometimes ugly, sometimes transcendent. Every attempt ends by these phenomena becoming abstractions, whether personified or not. Abstractions means going to the sukshma, going to the essence part of it, and that they find. Sometimes personified, sometimes not. Sometimes devatas, sometimes it goes into Brahman, Nirakar. So also it is found with the ancient Greeks. So Swamiji is taking another branch of the Aryan race to prove the same thing. So also it is found with the ancient Greeks. Their whole mythology is simply this abstracted nature worship. They have so many devatas there, Zeus and whatnot. So also with the ancient Germans, the Scandinavians and all the other Aryan races. So they are all Aryan races and there we find the same thing. Thus on this side too, a very strong case has been made out that religion has its origin in the personification of the powers of nature. These two views, though they seem to be contradictory, can be reconciled on a third basis, which to my mind is the real germ of religion. So Swamiji has shown two theories, and Swamiji showed there is a common thing, and that we'll call the origin of religion, that we shall take up on the next turn. Om Paratatve Sada Lino Ramakrishna Samagyaya Yo Dharma Sthapan Rato Viresham Tam Namamyam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.